Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter Supporters Network webinar. My name's Ian MacArthur and I'm the director of the Charter, and it's a real pleasure to host this afternoon's webinar on the importance of health and well-being. Goodness, health and well-being came to the fore something like we couldn't have imagined over the last 2 years or so through the impacts of the pandemic. And certainly we've got a superb panel this afternoon that will be able to take us through some insights on health and well-being. But perhaps really interesting is the impact that we saw on mental well-being and health through the pandemic. We had a physical infectious disease, but actually the lasting impact, many of the lasting impacts that we've seen across employers in Greater Manchester have been on people's mental health. So it's really great to have such a great panel to explore some of the issues, to point you in some of the direction of some of the resources that we have created and others have produced to support employers, and really to talk you through perhaps some of the things that you can actually do yourself. So delighted to be joined by Hayley, the Exec Lead for GM Moving and the Chief Officer at GreaterSport. Also Charlene Mulhern, Mental Health Wellbeing System Lead. It says at the Health and Social Care Partnership, but that no longer exists, is it? I'm sure Charlene will tell us the name of our new organisation. And finally, and not least, Sally Hemming, Dr. Sally Hemming, Health and Wellbeing Lead at Ernst & Young. So we always like to have an employer on the webinars as well, so that we can hear firsthand what it's like to deal with these issues in an organisation and to share best practice. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Hayley to speak first of all, Hayley, and really, you know, GM Moving, GreaterSport, it sounds very kind of physical activity, get your shorts on and get running, but I know there's way more to it than that. And particularly the interface between physical health, physical activity, and mental health. It'd be great if you could explore that a little bit for us, Hayley.
Sure, thanks Ian, and I'm really delighted to be here this afternoon. So as Ian said, I'm here to talk about physical activity, and I lead a movement for movement, GM Moving, and I'm Chief Exec at GreaterSport, which is a charity that plays a key leadership role in that movement. GM Moving is for all of us. It's about how we, any of us in our work, in our home life, and in our family life, support people to keep moving more for all the physical and health benefits that brings. And I think I come into this conversation today very much as an employer, as Chief Exec of a charity, and also as somebody who leads that movement across Greater Manchester and is trying to support people in all their organisations to support their workforce. And, you know, I suppose the way I see it is that if we are physically and mentally well, we will be brilliant at work. You know, we've got to create the conditions for our staff and our teams and each other to be physically and mentally well in order that we can turn up to do our best work and contribute to the purpose of our organisations. So that's something that's like underpins everything I do as an employer, but also then that contributes to our whole philosophy through GreaterSport, which is, you know, how do we support employers out there to create those kind of conditions in all the sort of range of types of employment situations that people are in. And Ian, you've talked about the pandemic there. Clearly, the pandemic impacted on different workplaces and workforces in so many different ways. And so there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to how you support physical and mental well-being in the workplace. So it's very much about really taking a person-centered approach and understanding our people and life circumstances and our work context, but then being able to create the conditions to change culture, mindsets and beliefs around physical activity in the workplace. And you mentioned putting your shorts on and getting out there and doing stuff. One of the biggest learnings we've had, and John, who leads this area of work for us over the last few years, is that we need to make a real culture shift away from the idea that being active through work and in work isn't necessarily about doing a Tough Mudder or signing up for a 100-mile bike ride, or doing some hardcore event and some team building activity. So the culture shift we're trying to support is, yes, that's what some people want to do. Of course it is. Some people get a real buzz out of that sense of team spirit and engaging in events and activities and formal, organised, structured sport and physical activity. But also there's a whole load of people for whom that isn't what they're interested in. They don't see themselves in that. They don't see how they can fit that into their working day or into their life. And actually, some of the changes that we can all make are really tiny things. Tiny things that we're about designing, moving back into life. So, for example, we created a whole sort of movement and a conversation around what people wear on their feet to work, to create a sense of permission and a culture in which you might be able to wear trainers to work. If you work, depending on what role you have, what kind of organisation, but a lot of the partners that we work with, there is this kind of assumption that women in particular need to put on high heels to go to work. So we did a whole thing called Active Souls a few years ago, which really gained a lot of traction, which is really not all about wearing trainers to work. It was about changing our mindsets and attitudes and beliefs around how we move and how we might move around active travel and transport, and then also how we can perhaps get a short walk during the working day, or how we might design a bit of movement into our day, standing desks, all sorts of small things that can make really, really big difference to how much we move, because we know a lot of people in their working days are sedentary, sitting at our desks. So a big shift in that when a lot of people were working from home. So it's about changing culture, changing mindsets and beliefs, challenging some of the assumptions, and then it is about changing as organisations, changing some of our policies then. So what's our policy and practice, and what kind of behaviours are we driving in our workforce? We know that we can't rely on people's individual motivation and capability to kind of make this happen for themselves. We've got to create conditions in which it's ever more likely that people are going to move during the course of their working day, and to have the flexibility to move at home too. And then there might be some things around organisational, the physical environment. How do we create physical environments that support people to move more? And then how do we support the social interaction around movement and the cultural norms to make it more acceptable for you to get away from your working desk and go for a walk and interact with colleagues, etc. So there's a whole range of kind of shifts we're trying to make really to support and design moving back into life for our workforces and for workforces across Greater Manchester. We've got some packages and tools and webinars and toolkits and all sorts of resources that can facilitate that. But I think I'll stop in a minute and let others come in, because they'll build on this, I'm sure. But for us, it's the physical activity aspect to a much wider holistic approach to wellbeing in and outside of work. So we do a lot of work with Charlene to make sure that physical activity contributes to a much wider approach to health and wellbeing in the workplace as well. So I'll pause there and let others come in, and I'm happy to take the conversation wherever it goes.
Thanks very much, Hayley. That's a great oversight of what you do, and you've been one of our earliest partners in the Charter. I can remember speaking very early on with John about the toolkit that you have to encourage employers to support physical activity, and absolutely it's about movement rather than getting the shots on, as I put it. So no, I think that's a really great overview. Could you just explore a little bit though, Hayley, on the linkages that you see in working with different organizations or even your own, about the linkage between physical activity and mental health, getting outside, enjoying green space. Have you got some evidence around that, and how do you encourage, how do you nudge people in that direction?
Yeah, I think that's one of the really great learnings, particularly over the last few years, is there's lots and lots of evidence that demonstrates the mental health benefits of moving. But I think what we've realised more than ever, even just anecdotally, but the evidence shows as well, is just how immediate that can be. How immediate the stepping outside, taking some deep breaths, connecting with nature, spending time with family or friends or the dog, can bring an immediate benefit. And I think for a long time, people have focused on the need to become more active to support physical well-being, and often in the long term or the medium to long term. But in the micro moment of any day, a short walk around the block, breathing in some air, taking the dog out, can have an immediate benefit to you, bringing your stress levels down, lifting your mood. So I think we've seen that more the last couple of years than ever before, and it's become but we need to change the conversation around it. So this isn't about doing something now that's yes, it is going to prolong your life in the next 20, 30, 40 years, but it's also that absolutely immediate benefit to your mental well-being and your physical well-being in the here and now. So that's critical, really.
Thanks, Hayley. I think it's remarkable the number of people over the last 2 years that have found little pathways and cycle pathways and bridleways and areas around their own home that they didn't even know existed until the government told us that we were only allowed to walk 1 hour a day. It really did force us into that journey of discovery. And people have heard me say this before, but I can remember when working for myself a few years ago, I was told to get a dog. Largely because it punctuates the day. That dog doesn't know what a 9-to-5 day is, but they do need a walk in the morning and they do need a walk at night. And that gives you that discipline. Certainly helped me. And I'm on to my second one now. So there you go. Something must have worked. Hayley, thanks very much for now. We'll encourage everyone, please, if you have got some questions for any of our speakers today, or you want some more information, please pop the question in the questions tab. You'll see at the bottom right-hand side of your screen a chat function, which I know a lot of you have already populated and said hi, which is great. But if you've got any specific questions, if you could pop them into the questions tab, and then they'll come through to me and we can moderate those to the panel. So moving on to another fantastic partner of the Charter, Charlene Mulhern. Charlene worked with us, it's over a year ago now, Charlene, I'm guessing, first of all, and created our mental wellbeing toolkit, which you can find on our website. But we've been updating that and working with others to provide new case studies, etc. So I won't steal any of Charlene's thunder, and I know Charlene's got some slides that she wants to take us through. So over to you, Charlene. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. And I just need to, as Ian mentioned at the start, just make the correction that we've now moved from the Health and Social Care Partnership to what is the NHS Greater Manchester Integrated Care. So yeah, apologies, I've not managed to update the slides in the last week. But yeah, I'm going to just take you through a whiz around the mental wellbeing toolkit and just mention some of the resources available. And as was just starting, I just wanted to start with what is mental health. And so mental health is not just the absence of a mental disorder, it is very much that state of well-being where we as individuals do realise that our own abilities and can cope with those day-to-day stresses of everyday life, can work productively and fruitfully. And obviously this is the focus of our conversation today, and we're able to make that contribution to our own community, and that's from the World Health Organization. And so all of us, each and every one of us, have mental health, and so we've all got lived experience around mental well-being. And so it's, as Hayley's mentioned and Ian's alludes to, it's what we can do in that space to support ourselves, the colleagues that we work with, and our organisations to evolve. I just wanted to touch on, so I love this, the blog tree by Pip Wilson, because I just wanted to touch on, people talk about emotions and having crap days and good days and so on, that I can definitely relate to this. I was at number 5 this morning, my IT was not working at all, and I was definitely that individual. Whereas there was points last week I was about to go on leave, and there was definitely points last week I was feeling whether I was a 10 or a 20, I'm not quite sure, but I was definitely feeling a lot better form, and that's completely normal. Our emotions do fluctuate on a day-to-day basis, and there's times where we feel really great and sometimes where we don't feel so great, and that's okay, because we need to have those fluctuations to know when we're having some really great days. It's when it goes on for a really long time, when you're feeling not so great, and it goes on for a really long time and it stops you doing the things that you love and enjoy and prevents you doing the things you love. That's when we need to be more concerned about our mental health and either seek some kind of support individually for ourselves or go seek support from other professionals. So I'm just going to move through to just briefly the scale of the problem across Greater Manchester. So we all, as I mentioned, have mental health. The stats are 1 in 6 of us are experiencing a common mental health problem at any one point. And so that's basically almost 500,000 people, and it won't always be the same people. And so those 1 in 6 people, that could be any one of us, family, friends, colleagues that we work with. And so it's always been mindful that there's often times where we need to have those conversations, those supportive conversations, and I'll come on to the resources and support available within the toolkit. And it's okay not to be okay. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. It's how we seek support thereafter. So mental wellbeing and work. So as Ian mentioned, we did publish with the Good Employment Charter what was the mental health toolkit for employers. And so this toolkit, we'll send out the links. It's been available for the last year. But what's amazing about this toolkit is that we know the evidence around what improves work and mental health. Hayley's mentioned some of the aspects that really support us, linked to like the 5 ways to wellbeing, connecting, taking notice, give, physical activity and learning. We know lots of the things that support our well-being, and then we also know the things linked to work around the benefits of raising awareness to staff. We know about the benefits of providing training to managers and creating that positive culture, that positive workplace culture, and that right support to those who need it. And what's amazing about this toolkit is that this toolkit helps consolidate all of that information in one place and is specific for Greater Manchester. And then in addition, we've got some amazing case studies that are so very different in terms of what they're offering for employees. But I think each and every one of those case studies can help teach and support all different organizations, including the one I work in, about what really good looks like. And so it's about what we can do. So in terms of the toolkit itself, it's broken down into these 8 sections. So it's about how we can make that commitment to mental health, what kind of leaders and support and champions that we've got within our organizations to be able to take this. And this can be at all different levels. It doesn't need to just be at a senior level, but how can we take this commitment around mental health and make it real and start making those changes that Hayley mentioned around starting to nudge and shift that culture, positive culture change? How do we then build the approach? So understanding what the needs, what insights that we're capturing, and so many organizations already capture insights from their employees already. So how do we be able to build the insights, update policies accordingly, depending what the needs of individuals and teams are coming forward with? How do we then create a positive culture? So this section will cover everything about healthy activities that Hayley has already mentioned. I'm not going to go back over that. And all about how do we reduce work stresses? What do we need to do? And then there's conversations, even though we've got this information in the toolkit, it's about how we make it real then as individuals, as yourself that are logging in. Work out how do we create that positive culture? How do we make it real? It won't be that one size doesn't fit all. It won't be the same for any one organization. It's about having those conversations within your organization around what shifts and changes need to be made, and continuously keep doing temperature checks and check-ins, because this won't happen overnight. This will be a journey, and you might not get it completely right straight away, and that's okay. But it's about taking continuous action to make improvements. The 4th one is around providing support and training. Now we have a whole host of support and training. It's always really helpful to get feedback if there's additional training needed or if it doesn't quite meet needs, but I'm going to touch on training a bit more now in a second. And then we've got around how do we support individuals within the workplace who do have any kind of mental health condition, what support they need, and how do you provide the right support? So we've got information within this toolkit that breaks it all down. How do you provide the right support? And then how do we support individuals to come back into the workplace? How do we support them to recover? And what kind of things do we need to consider? And that final bit, which is almost that gold standard platinum point, is how do we then measure success? So when you as individuals go through the toolkit, now I'm aware as organizations or individuals, you can go through this toolkit and you probably think going through, you're already doing 2, 6, 7, and 5. And that's amazing. So I don't think anyone's starting from the starting point. It's just that there might be aspects that you want to build, develop, and grow on. And that's the reason we pulled it all together in one place, to try and support you around what the evidence is and what is available for you to be able to access freely. Then I'm not going to show the toolkit, but it's quite interactive. It's quite visual, and you'll be able to just go to the sections specifically that relate to what you want to take on board and look to take into your workplace. There's also specific individual resources. So where you can promote these resources across your workplace and with your teams. These are all applicable for individuals to utilize. And I'll mention the Wellbeing Toolkit at the end. So the tools and the tools and available that's across GM. One of them is the GM Wellbeing Toolkit. So this is available for you as individuals, whether you work in HR, in OD, if you are managers, or even if you're just an individual that wants to improve their sleep or get, better breathing, help to, to reduce your stress. Whether it's around thinking about the menopause or dealing with anxiety, there's a whole range of tools and resources within this link in this toolkit to be able to support you as individuals or as teams. We then also have our Connect 5 training. This is our training to support individuals have those mental well-being conversations. There are 3 different modules. You can look at the QR code, and we'll be sending the slides around afterwards. So the dates are always refreshed. And so I think at the moment they're just working out what August date they're getting between holidays, but you generally will have dates for module 1, 2, and 3 every month that you can sign up to, freely available because we have paid for it. And basically we want to support you to be able to have mental well-being conversations within your workplace and also with your family, friends, and communities. We've got Living Life to the Full resources, and basically these are resources not just to support around stress, anxiety, which is really, really important, but also how do you keep well? How do you feel happier, stay calm? How do you be able to look at things? How do you be able to look at things if you're a parent? How do you support yourself as a new mum and new parents? There's a whole range of evidence-based resources within this Living Life to the Full toolkit. We've also translated them into what is now, I need to do a correction, over 17 different community languages, including just recently Ukrainian as well. We have good prevention is suicide prevention, and so you never know when this difficult conversation may arise, but there's an amazing training that's available for suicide prevention. It takes 20 minutes. It's called Learn to Save a Life. I promote it to all family and friends. I just think it's an amazing resource to be able to access at any point. It's a video that just to watch, but there's some amazing learning within that. And if I could request anything from today, if everyone could go away and do that training, then I think that would be a really great job done. And then we've got other digital solutions and support available, again, freely accessible. We've got Silver Cloud, so it's a program to help ease levels of stress, help you sleep better, build resilience, again, accessible at any point. You just need to access it by the link that we have, and it's for those individuals aged over 16. But we're also mindful that you may have children, may have nieces and nephews and children around. It's really important that we're promoting support to young people and children as well. So we've also got COOF that is aged for 11 to 18-year-olds to allow those young people to independently access the support that they may want, which is chatting to their friendly counsellors, being able to read articles that are actually written by young people, and just getting that support in the community, within that COOF community that they feel that they need. And then the final slide, I believe, is around the Greater Manchester Bereavement Service. We've all had experiences of bereavement, and there's different types of bereavement. And so what's really important is that if there is anyone that you know that is dealing with grief, or if it's yourself, whether it's personal, professional, or by suicide, we have support available across Greater Manchester. The opening times are there. You can email, you can go on the website, you can have telephone support. But the most important thing is don't suffer in silence. It's really important to seek the support that's available, and we do have that support that's out there. What I will say is you do not need to remember all these slides that I've just covered, because all of this is included within the Mental Wellbeing Toolkit. So all of this is within that one document that I mentioned. And I try and talk really fast to keep in my 10 minutes. I'm going to pass to you, Ian.
No, you were fantastic, and such a lot of information there. Amazing, Charlene. You and your colleagues producing all of that is brilliant. I will say, for the 20 minutes of the suicide prevention training, well worth it, and absolutely let's just underline that request that if you haven't done it today, please go away, get the link, and spend 20 minutes doing it. I think the subject is so broad in many respects. What we're doing for good employment on the various aspects of good employment lead to better health. But still, we've got to understand that as you rightly put it, the individual's perspective about where that individual is, and it's being able to understand that and tailor support around them. I also saw some chat in the chat about menopause. We've done quite a bit on menopause. If people aren't aware, do have a look through our website. I think we ran a webinar maybe about this time last year, and there's a number of pieces of guidance and blogs also on the on the website, but a subject that we will be coming back to for sure. So for now, Charlene, I don't see any specific questions. Tanya's point about slides, just to confirm to everyone, the slides will be passed around at the end of the event, but we also record this, so you can come back and have a look at it at any time or share it with colleagues. It'll be available on our website, as will a short blog, which will capture the main points. So all the resources spoken about today will be available for you to come and revisit. But I'd like to now turn to Sally and listen to Sally tell us a little bit about how, as an employer, a big employer like EY, you've been tackling some of these issues over the last couple of years, Sally. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Ian. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I sense I'm in very good company, having listened to both Hayley and Charlene talking about things. So first things first, I just dropped off from my home Wi-Fi. So if anything goes skew-if as I'm talking, I'll dial back on. Okay, but bear with me and wish me luck. You'll know as well as me, well-being is hugely influenced by resilience. So I'm coming to this short session telling you about what we're doing at EY, having had my resilience tested with regards to tech. So like I said, good to meet you. We're in good company. And what I'd like to do really for sort of 5 or 10 minutes is share with you a little bit about how we think about well-being in EY. Now, when I talk about EY, there's about 19,000 of us in the UK and Ireland. Some of us are billing, so charging our time to clients. Others of us are not. We're making it possible for our client-facing individuals to do that. So people's health and well-being is absolutely fundamental to what we do. And we have, I guess we'd call it holistic way of thinking about well-being. And what I'd like to do is just share with you some of that thinking, really perhaps to nudge a different way of thinking about health and well-being, and equally more than happy to take questions or link in with you afterwards. So by means of an introduction, I'm Sally. Sally Hemming. I worked with EY about 5 years ago, went off to do different things, and I returned as their first UK&I health and wellbeing lead in December last year. I am delighted to be back and to embed health and wellbeing from a strategic perspective in our organisation. A long time, the great work I do with EY. I remain an academic researcher with the University of Loughborough. So what that means to you and me is I come at it kind of with two angles. One from an HR practitioner perspective, which I've worked in HR for about 20 years, probably longer between you and me. But I also come at things from a kind of more kind of scientific and technical perspective as well. And what I've included on this slide is a quote from my dear friend, and I'm sure because he's Manchester based, some of you will be familiar with Kerry Cooper. So Cooper, and he would say to you and I, and you may well have been at his sessions recently, somebody told me earlier, that he will say that well-being is actually not those kind of more gimmicky things that perhaps actually not so long ago we talked about, but it's actually about strategy. And it's actually about changing the culture. And both Charlene and Hayley picked up on this earlier with regards to working conditions and how things are around here. And I think that's quite fitting to how we think about well-being in the context of EY. So we like to think of well-being, and again, Charlene helpfully provided a definition earlier, as how we think and feel about things, everything taken into account in our lives. So that might be individual factors that are beautifully unique to us. It might be work factors, but it might be other things that are going on. It might be the experiences we have in life, so our ability to cope, or perhaps it's not the experiences we have in life, perhaps hindering our ability to live and work with resilience. And that might be more likely, say, perhaps if we're younger, so we put simply haven't had the time to acquire those work experiences. And I just want you to have that in the back of your mind. So well-being for us is how we think and feel about life, everything taken into account. And what I would say is we take up a huge space in people's lives. We consider that a privilege, and it is absolutely critical that we always appreciate the space that we take up. Ian talked very clearly earlier about, the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic on health and wellbeing narratives. Now, we all know that actually pre-COVID-19, people's wellbeing was fundamentally important, but perhaps we weren't getting the traction that we needed. And we believe we have an opportunity now to accelerate those wellbeing conversations that actually, arguably at times, perhaps we should have been having in a more energetic fashion before COVID-19. So that's how we think about things. Fairly straightforwardly, we want to be on the front foot and we want to do more. So we have an established health and wellbeing program in EY called Health EY. You can read about it in the case studies, but we're going to be building on that and enhancing that in light of those experiences, and specifically the ongoing ambiguity that frankly we are all facing, despite the narrative of, we're through the pandemic, we're coming out of the other side. We're taking a cautious view on that, and we're being careful and paying regard to what our people need. So I want to get you thinking about, I guess, your own well-being in the moment, and then I'm going to pad out in a little bit more detail some of really what our health and wellbeing program rests on. Now, there are lots of different ways in which we can measure our well-being, but I want us to think about it in the context of this session this afternoon in terms of busyness. So what we know during the pandemic, and particularly for our working populations where so many people could be working from home, is we had this great blurred space of stuff going on for people. We had life factors, work factors, and self factors all interacting and mixing for our people, leading into and feeding into how they think and feel about life at any one time, so their well-being. And we realized, and I'm hoping that this resonates with lots of you, because it certainly does with me, that we were just busy. And for the first time as an organization, we could see that busyness. We could see people working in their lounges, in their bedrooms, in their gardens, wherever they were. We saw the kids in the background, the pets, perhaps the new pets. And it really shed light for us the criticality of that space that we took up, and how it was absolutely important that despite that busyness and all those factors whizzing around, we were making sure that people were okay. Now, we're coming out the end of a global pandemic, and there's lots of talk about getting back to normal, etc. You and I will probably know as much as me that normality is really loosely defined, and that none of us really know what hybrid working looks like, how we're going to think and feel about things, not just now, but perhaps in 3 or 6 months, and perhaps, in 12 months or 24 months. But what we do know is that busyness and people's ability and self-belief that they can get done what they need to in their work and in their life is an absolutely fundamental basis to people's well-being. And we keep reminding ourselves of that. So I want to ask you a couple of simple questions. So if I were to ask you, think about a scale, 0 to 10. I've put this very unsophisticated arrow diagram on this slide here. On one side, we have 0. And I want you to think about 0 as it says here. Perhaps I haven't got so much on my plate, or even if I have, do you know what? I'm okay with that. I can meet those things that are being asked of me. I don't feel that my well-being is being undermined. I'm generally okay about stuff. And then on the other side of this scale, we have that 10 point. And when we are at that 10 point, we've got too much on our plate, might not feel comfortable, We might be waking up at night thinking about our work. We might be struggling to get to sleep because actually we're thinking about work or life demands that we might be needing to meet. And what that means is when we're at that 10-point side of things, we're going to be a little unsure actually about our ability to cope with things. And that in turn can undermine our overall well-being and quality of life, and at worst, our health. So I just want you to think for a moment, where are you on this scale today? And for those of us that are comfortable, feel free to use the chat function to share your score. Where are you? How busy are you? How much is on your plate today between 0 and 10? So to give you a little bit more perspective on how we pad out our health and wellbeing program here at EY and how we conceptualize things, think about that busyness, think about that concept of wellbeing, how we think and feel about life, everything taken into account. I want to try and bring that to life, hopefully, in a simple fashion. And if I don't, hey, you can ask me afterwards and I'll try and make it clear. So well-being for us, and have a look at this balance beam with that well-being in the middle. So that busyness you've just thought about and rated yourself will dramatically feed into how you think and feel about life, your well-being at any one time. And what we believe is going on and is constantly affecting people's well-being is this balance beam. And there are two critical things. Demands, those things being asked of us, or those demands we perceive we are having to meet in our lives, and the resources we have available to us at any one time, whether we do or whether we perceive we do, to meet those demands. And you and I will both appreciate that when the demands are too high, whether they are or not, so we might believe they're too high, for example, even though they're not, and we do not have adequate resources available to us to meet those demands, our well-being is going to be shaken. And we are more likely to experience the negative effects of poor well-being and poor quality of life, which for some of us might show in health symptoms. It might show itself in other ways. For example, poor health behaviours. We might drink too much. We might not eat well. We might not sleep as much as we need to. And when we think about those demands and those resources, we think about 3 buckets of stuff. And those buckets of stuff are our psychological or mental resources, our physical or physiological mental resources, whatever that may be, will be uniquely different to each of us, and our social resources. And we think of those 3 areas of buckets of energy available to us at any one time to meet those demands. And that tells us from a firm perspective that what we need to do is we need to spend our time making sure that our people have adequate resources and not overly demanding demands. 1, from the jobs we're asking them to do, and 2, in the lives they lead, which we appreciate we do not always have control of and is beautifully unique to everyone. So how we've tried to think about things in terms of those demands. So we know if people are too busy in the jobs we ask people to do, that their well-being could be shaken, particularly if they don't have adequate resources. We have tried to build a health and wellbeing approach and strategy that helps people work on those resources. Those resources might be behaviours that people should be undertaking. It might be things they've never done before, for example. So we have tried to introduce a program that kind of nudges people on those energy buckets that I talked about. So we'll talk to them about, these are the things that are good for you to do for your physical health, might be some of the things Hayley mentioned in terms of not being sedentary, for example. And we'll also help them build and develop skills that are important to them in terms of resilience. But we are also conscious that that means we also need to have an eye on the detail in terms of the demands and pressures we are asking people to work under, not only in our jobs, but actually overall in life, which has been accelerated through the pandemic, of which most of us, I'm sure, on this call would have experienced. So that blurring, for example, of work-life boundaries. So how do we bring that to life, and how do we know where to start, and how do we know what to focus on in our approach? What I've included on the right-hand side are of this slide are really some examples of those pressure points and demands that we tend to focus on them. And I'm sure that these will be familiar to a lot of you. And the reason will be that actually for those of you, perhaps you might work in health and safety, or you might work with your health and safety colleagues. Many of these are actually HSE categories for work stress. So that notion of pressure potentially leading to burnout in a worst case scenario, that we know and have known all along for decades are critically important to people's well-being, and we are very mindful of that. And those things are work pressures, work demands, sitting in the jobs that people are doing, but they're also life and self characteristics. So for example, are our staff affected by financial pressures that undermines quality of life? Are they living and working with a long-term health condition, for example, that might increase the risks of them experiencing mental health strain, for example? We try and understand that by asking our people about those things and then intervening from health and wellbeing program perspective. But other things we're aware of that are really important in terms of those pressures and demands are relationships. So for example, do our people at work have adequate relationships with their line managers? Are our line managers having regular wellbeing conversations with our people? And if not, why not? And how do we help them have wellbeing conversations in a more regular and better way? But we also think about change and control. So for example, to what extent do our people feel that they're moving through change, and are they able to move through periods of change, for example, with resilience or actually with disruption? So where we know, for example, there are periods of change that we need to navigate, pandemic is a great example, we will try and help our people with the resilient strategies they need to be able to move through periods of adversity without those situations being damaging, but with those situations actually bringing about growth. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight to how we think about health and wellbeing conceptually here at EY. Happy to invite questions. And Ian, I think I'm handing back to you.
Sally, thank you so much. You've certainly sparked a bit of reaction in the chat. That's fantastic. By the looks of things, most people are way over halfway towards 7, 8, maybe 9 at the moment. So that's quite interesting. Though there was a interesting contribution. Let me just find it. Someone saying they've got their head in the sand, or they may have their head in the sand. Carmel said, I think my head's in the sand. I should be an 8, but I'm about 4 or 5. But again, I'm avoiding things. Not sure if this is a good or a bad thing. What's your view?
So sorry, Ian, just ask me that question again.
So Carmel says, I should be an 8, but I'm about 4 or 5. But again, because I'm avoiding things, not sure if this is a good or a bad thing.
That's such a difficult question to answer straightforwardly and personally for Carmel, if I'm totally honest. But what I would say is that, so how we think and feel about life at any one time is not this stable concept and structure that is just as it is. Life is going on around us, and I think we sometimes try fabulously hard to sort of live and work like we have control over everything, when really we don't. Things are shifting all the time. So if somebody's well-being at the moment should be an 8, but actually it feels like a 3 or a 4 right now and again, that's okay. And if we have short-term acute periods that feel like that, that's fine. We don't need to over worry perhaps or catastrophize about those scenarios. But here's a word of caution. What none of us want in our lives, which work takes up a huge space, and I really try and sort of bring this to life in our narrative around wellbeing at EY, are chronic ongoing times where that busyness is 8, 9, 10. Because what we know for the majority of people is that over time, those conditions are harmful. And that's the important thing for all of us individually to have in our minds, but also for the workforces that we're perhaps supporting or even leading, is that chronic enduring periods of busyness where people perceive the demands are here, but the resources they have, whether true or not, are here, that they believe they have to meet these situations, will always increase the risks of stressors in a working population. So I would say, if you think you should be 8 and you're 3 or 4, that's a clear call to action, certainly after this call, to think about, okay, well, what is it that is making you score at this time and is making you think differently, and to say, okay, what can I do?
Sorry, Sally, I like the point that Hayley's made about line management, and it's certainly something that Carrie Cooper, who you quoted at the beginning, would certainly say that, you know, lots of this is down to the effectiveness and the capacity and the emotional intelligence and maybe cultural intelligence of line managers, and a lot relies on that. I'd also make the point that one of the resources on your diagram that isn't there, I think, that we overlook all the time, I'm afraid, in workplaces, is time. Mm-hmm. We can account for just about anything, but we don't count for time in the same way. We don't plan for time in the same way. And time seems to be elastic commodity in people's working lives. And clearly that understanding by emotionally intelligent line managers around those demands and how you work with time, I think is something that then reflects hopefully culturally on an organization, that the culture is set correctly at the top around time pressures. And I think that is so important as people try and plan their work and work their way through. Hayley, what did you mean? Was that pretty much what you meant around line management?
Yeah, I really think it's critical. If you haven't, so everybody in an organisation can at least have one relationship with a line manager in which you can create the conditions for that level of trust and honesty and for conversation around well-being. So, you know, the ideal for me is that culture exists right across the organisation, and you might have multiple places you can go and have that conversation. But if you can only have one, then it has to be, you know, that line manager relationship has got to be a really strong one. You've got to make it culturally normal, not just acceptable, normal to ask and create time and space for conversation about well-being. Everything that Sally said about, you know, the interplay between kind of work and life is so important in this. There's no you can't separate these things out, you know, and when you've got people who've got stuff going on in life, how can you expect to say, well, park that, it's 9 o'clock now, you know, let's have a conversation about work. So I think that's something we've been really focused on, is making sure that people, both informally but certainly in kind of monthly one-to-ones and those kind of review meetings, that there's a culture in which it's normal and okay to talk about your personal life if you want to, you know, what's going on for you, and then you know, that's when you can draw on your tools and resources, because we've got a whole package of tools and resources and support and, you know, around the things that people can do. But if you're not having a conversation about what's going on, then how can you possibly know what to kind of signpost people to, or what kind of support to remind people of in those moments? And it is in those, you know, real sort of moments that this comes to the fore.
Ian, just to sort of add something on what sort of, you know, Hayley said, I think one of the things we've realised, one of the things we're talking about more and more here at EY with people is boundaries, and this, you know, really focuses on time. You know, how do you get time back? You know, when our people are strained, they are often strained because of a lack of boundaries. So you just get this big mess of life with everything kind of bundled in, you know, and that's tough. That's really tough. And some of us are better at dealing with that than others. You know, perhaps we don't have, you know, for example, caring responsibilities, therefore demands might be less, etc. But one of the things we have started to talk to people about a little bit more is to say, help us understand what those boundaries need to be, because we will find it incredibly difficult to identify thousands of people's different individual well-being requirements, and, you know, with the best will in the world, we just wouldn't be able to do that, and things are so changeable. But we have started talking to people about the adequacy of those boundaries between work and life, and to really say to our people, if you ever think or feel that we are taking space that is precious to you and that is undermining your well-being, you need to tell us that. Because sometimes line managers in the day-to-day of a line management role will miss things. And what we are asking is for all of our people is, when we breach those boundaries, you have to tell us that and help us support your health and well-being in a better way. It's just one of the ways in which we're trying to bring that to life, kind of operationally. Hopefully that's useful.
Thanks, Sally. It absolutely is. Charlene, in the toolkits, do we address the line management and how, the line manager, and how we build capacity there?
Yeah, we've got choice, so it's not just one thing. There's a mix of training and support. So there's nationally endorsed training. There's training you could pay for. There's training that's freely accessible across Greater Manchester. A lot of it is between reading up on the evidence that's available in the links for managers, looking at what's available, such as that Wellbeing Toolkit that talks about how to have those check-ins with individuals, how to be able to have those conversations, to even understand what the boundaries are. To do that, almost it doesn't cover the scaling, but it asks similar questions as part of a check-in to understand how individuals are and understand where best support is given and how they can better support that individual. So that there's not just one quick fix, as Hayley mentioned at the start. There's not one size fits all, but there's a mix of resources. And that said, if organisations on this call decide that there's a major gap somewhere, then again, we're open to developing something different. We haven't gone through the space yet around specific training for leaders and leadership, but that might be something that we take forward across Greater Manchester. I know Hayley's organisation has been doing lots of work in this space over the last few years. So it's something that if there's a need, then it's something we will take forward.
Charlene, that's great. And leaders, actually, we're starting to think and developing a bit of a program around leadership for good employment too. So there's lots of correlation between our activity in this space. As ever, we get hard against time on these events, and we try to keep them to an hour. I do have one question here from Vicky. What would you consider the key elements are for an impactful workplace wellbeing program? Sally, I'll start with you quickly. Maybe just give me 1 or 2 points, and then we'll build this.
So I think broadly thinking, Vicky, I would say a health and wellbeing program should focus on prevention. It should focus on intervening when health and wellbeing problems are coming about. And it should also focus on supporting people where wellbeing challenges are continuing. So we realise that, people are wonderful, but everyone's circumstances are so different that we need to make sure that, yes, we're preventing wellbeing problems coming about, but we also recognise that sometimes they do. And that in those scenarios, whether they're short-term or continuing over a career, we will support those scenarios.
And I think the last 2 years have pulled back some of the veneer of that as well. You were talking before about life is all joined up. Well, the policy response needs to be joined up because life is. Hayley, what would you say?
I think to build on that, I think it's the adaptability of it. And, when someone's struggling, often the tools and resources are the last thing that they think of. So there's something about it being able to adapt, but also to be front and centre of mind. So when someone's having a tough time, if they don't remember, there's this whole place where there's all these tools and resources that I can, point to, then somebody has the ability, that culture, again, it comes back to culture. What's the nudge then that reminds you in that moment? And just personally speaking, just an example, I've had COVID a few weeks ago, and then I've had a close bereavement, and I completely forgot that there's stuff that I can use, and that I get. So then I went, I'll go and get acupuncture treatment to try and, support my recovery. And then we have the same way. You can have 45 minutes out of your working week to get some exercise and get outside. And there was a day when I just needed some space, and it felt culturally absolutely fine to postpone a meeting till later that day and just go up the hill with the dog. And in those moments, that's your reset. That's your, that culture of, this is what matters, putting well-being first, so that then the rest of the week can go better, or rather than just trying to struggle through the week. So I think it's about being adaptable, but also being front and center of mind, or being nudged when it's not front and center of your own mind.
Really, really great point, Hayley, and thanks for sharing that with us. Charlene, and last word for you.
There's one point, because I'm from a public health background, I'm going to say it's about how do you know it works? I suppose it's being able to capture the data, the evidence, it's being able to build the insights so you know what's working, what's not working for your staff, and being able to review it, do touch points or review it annually so you can make the adaptations that are needed for your specific workplace, because you don't know what you don't know, so you need that data, evidence, insights to guide you.
Charlene, thank you so much. In fact, thank all three of you, Sally, Hayley, Charlene. It's been a fantastic hour, well spent. This is the last webinar for a little while. We'll take a bit of a break over August, but watch this space for more activities in September. We will specifically be doing things around health and well-being with Hayley's colleague, John Brady, who many of you will have met at other events into the autumn, particularly around physical activity and mental well-being. So thanks everyone for attending. Again, to our fantastic panel, thank you very much indeed, and see you in the autumn. Bye-bye.